Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you live. If you have decided to leverage this webinar as an asynchronous resource, we're glad you're here too. Just to note that we are in a team format. So if you need to mute your mic because we'll be able to hear you. And you can also, afterwards, we have office hours, you can also chime in as well. Then you are at the CTE and UDL webinar for the CCIL project, California Coalition for Inclusive Learning. We'll be sharing how UDL principles can be effectively integrated into CTE programs to support the concepts of identity and belonging as key areas of learner variability. So if you haven't already, if you could grab the link in the chat, there you have access to the home base, or you can scan the QR code as well. Jen, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So CCIL leadership is possible by the partnership with CDE and CCEE. The grantee of the CCIL project is Placer County Office of Education. And then next slide. Our partners in this work, Fresno County Superintendent of Schools and the following county offices of education: Los Angeles, San Joaquin, Santa Clara, Sonoma, Placer, and 2 GeoLeads, Capital Central Foothill Area Consortium, and Valley to Coast. So without further ado, I will pass the baton to Jen Hanks and my CAS colleague, Donald Walker.
Thank you, everybody that's joining us live today or who is watching the recording. I'm Jen Hanks. I'm a coordinator out of Placer County Office of Ed for the CCIL project. And what brings me here today is basically a passion project. When I was a high school administrator for 13 years, I found myself wanting to promote more students being in our CTE pathways. And I found that UDL might be a way to make that happen. And so I got to start bringing that to light more with this job.
Good evening, or for you guys. I'm over here on the east side of the United States, so it's evening for me, so maybe afternoon for all. My name is Donald Walker. I'm a national CTE and UDL trainer for CAST, and I am here by way of my love of career technical education, which I discovered when I was in high school, but also for my love of universal design for learning, which I refer to as a liberation learning framework because of the empowerment and agency that it provides for the learner. So these are two concepts that are very, very near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you all today.
So throughout our time today, we have the chat box option. So at any time, feel free to put in the chat. You can introduce yourself, ask or answer a question, share an idea or a connection that you see, or even hyperlink a resource for your colleagues. You'll also see we have a lot of resources on the home base as well. And we do have many of our friends monitoring the chat, and they'll let us know if something arises to share. Also, when you're using the chat box, you can type an individual name, but I think in this one, since we're using a different format, it may not say all panelists. I think it will just say everyone. Is that correct, Brenda? Yes, okay, correct. Perfect. So your learning environment today, because we are in this different setting, you will have you'll see everybody, but feel free in your environment. If you would like to turn off your camera, that is totally fine. But at the end of today's session, there is a Q&A. So feel free to stay around and you'll be able to turn on your camera if you'd like, unmute yourself and ask questions about anything. You do have access to the slides and you do have access to what you see. This image here is our home base, which has a lot of resources that Dawn has linked on here. That may continue your learning. So today's goals we put on here to explore how identity and belonging are key areas of UDL and learner variability. But it also really, really ties to CTE. Rita Pearson says, every child deserves a champion. an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection. And that is something that Dawn is really going to dive into today and show you just like that is so important in everything, but it's really, really important in CTE as well, because we want these kids to not just take your pathways or your courses as a one and done. We want them to be completers. We want them to finish the whole thing, right? Also, we're going to begin to explore connections between the UDL guidelines and CTE programs through that identity and belonging. And then, because we only have an hour, all we're going to get to is take the first steps to discover how the UDL design process can minimize barriers to CTE. All right, we're going to start with what is your why? Very, very important to ground in our why. Dawn?
So, as you think about what your why is, and by that I mean, why are you in this field of career technical education? Why is it so important to you? What brings you to this work and to the service that you provide for your student population? My why goes all the way back, and if you look right at the center, it's WSHJ 88.3 FM, which was my high school radio station here in Southfield, Michigan. So I was one of those kids who had a high level of intelligence, but when I got to high school, I had a huge amount of distraction, and I did not perform well in high school whatsoever, and became very disconnected and very disinterested in a lot of my coursework. The one thing that kept me anchored, and when I tell you I was disconnected, there was a lot of dark moments surrounding that, but the one thing that kept me connected to high school was and I didn't know it at the time, my CTE course of radio. WSHJ. I had a Monday night show with a friend of mine for 2 hours every Monday, and being in class every single week was the joy of each day. It was the reason why I showed up. And because of that love that I found so early in my life, it led to the connections for my career. If you look off to what would be, I guess, like the left side of the screen, from there I went to a trade school, Specs Howard School of Media Arts. That's where I reminded myself that I am as smart as I think that I am, and that I do love what I love, and that I am good at it. And from there, my radio career took me everywhere I needed to go. It got me involved with radio stations in Grand Rapids, which is where I am right now. It allowed me every passion and every love that I have in my life right now, which would be this beautiful lady down here at the bottom left-hand corner, which is my wife, Tara. If you look over here, on the right, you see up at the top, by going through radio and going through the trade school and getting involved in the career technical education field that way. And as the data shows, it connects you back to post-secondary. I went back to college because I did try it the first time and failed miserably. I went back to college and I completed after 10 years, which led me to becoming a member of my fraternity, but also which is another one of my major loves, but it also, as a part of being married to this wonderful woman here, brought forth this family that I have. And right now, the youngest member of my family, who you see here on the right, my daughter Autumn, who is this like my heartbeat, I'm a dad's girl. What can I say? She is graduating. I'm just celebrating today that she got into our honors college for their college of selection this fall. And so all of these things have come from me connecting to my love of radio through career technical education. And so now I'm in a doctoral program, third year. All of this came again from connecting to that love. So my why is I want others to experience what I've experienced. I want others to have the life that I have led thus far. Thus far, I want everyone to have this kind of joy and this kind of satisfaction. And I will conclude it by saying this. My mentor at Specs, Dick Kernan, mentioned on our very first day, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And I am proud to say that I have yet to work a day in my life to this point in time. And so this is my why. To you, Jennifer.
Well, you may be a girl dad. Well, I'm a boy mom for sure. My overarching why though is increase accessibility and success for all learners to complete CTE pathways to support their future goal. But ultimately, these three handsome young men that you see here on the screen are my why. So the one kind of in the forefront with the blankie around his shoulders, yes, that is still his blankie. That is my oldest, that is Brody. And Brody is a junior at San Diego State University. And he went to the high school that I worked at. He went to Whitney High School, and he was a CTE pathway completer in sports med. And that really benefited him because at San Diego State, he is in the kinesiology with an emphasis in pre-physical therapy major. And in order to get to that section of kinesiology, you have to have had some sort of medical something or other. So that was a great thing for him to have that opportunity to take that CTE pathway. Well, in the background on the right-hand side, you'll see two other boys. One looks really tall. We call him the baby giraffe. That's my son, Brian, and he is a freshman in high school, 6'2", size 14 shoe. That's why he's the baby giraffe. And Brian's autistic, right? He's got a lot of things that he has to overcome to manage his autism. And so last year, the high school that our boys go to, they have a thing called Showcase Night. And because I'm fortunate enough that I know the school well and his dad teaches there as well, when we took him to Showcase Night, we said, we're going to take you to all of your CTE courses that you have an option to. And I want you to look at it through the lens of which one will you take for 3 years? And he said, okay. And at the end of the night, he was down to 2. And I said, what are you down to? He goes, culinary or business management. And I said, okay, any particular reason why? And he said, yes, I would like a job. I said, okay, that's a great reason. And so he landed with culinary. So he's a freshman right now taking culinary, and he absolutely is enjoying it, and it will take him to future things. And then the other young man there with the beanie, he wears a beanie almost every day. It could be 115 outside. This was the first day of school in California. Let me tell you, it was hot. And that's Buster. He too has an IEP, and he'll probably do something with entrepreneurship kind of pathway, but he'll have to pick a pathway. But we call him a party looking for a place. So, you know, he's gonna, if we had hospitality in our school, that's what he would do for CTE. So, but ultimately, I would ask all of you to think about a call to action when it comes to CTE. We want all students to be successful in their coursework, and we want to increase the number of students completing CTE pathways. It doesn't matter whether or not they're going to go to a 4-year or choose something different for their career. Because as you see with my kids and their variability, everybody has a reason to complete a CTE pathway. So as our inclusive welcome for today, this is what I'd like you to think about. Take a moment, and I will be quiet for a moment. Take a moment to jot down or think about your why for CTE and UDL. And do you have a personal connection to CTE and UDL? And if you would like, after that quiet moment, feel free to drop it in the chat. Brenda, might you have a why for CTE and UDL that you want to share?
Sure. So I have a middle schooler. He's in 7th grade. And so he's my second. So as I think about you know, your first child is like your, you know, period 1, right? But as I think about my middle schooler, I want to try to do things differently with him. So to get him closer to um just understanding what he may want to do as he progressed through middle school and eventually go to high school. So in CTE, since I did teach at the high school level, I didn't think it was as emphasized as much at my school. So I'm definitely like wanting to now through the lens of UDL learn what you and Don have to share and just see what can I do personally with it to support my son. So.
Awesome. I see that we did have our friend Kelly drop in the chat that her why is that she wants to see students who haven't had an opportunity to shine, to show the world what they're made of, especially students in impoverished areas. And that almost made me choke up and cry. That was genuine. I love that why. That is a great why. I see another one from our friend Shara. Doing right by kids so that the next generation are prepared for the future, ensuring that students with disabilities have opportunities to participate in CTE courses of interest and benefit from hands-on learning opportunities. These are fantastic. If you haven't gotten a moment yet to drop them in the chat, please feel free to do so because you know what? This is a shared learning opportunity today. And I'm not going to forget to say it, Don, so I'm saying it now. There is no smarter person in the room than the room itself. And we're hoping that today we all walk away with new learning that we can share together.
Jan,
All
I
right.
do want to add before you begin, so on the home base, there are some resources linked there that could be super helpful after this webinar, but there's a balance from the perspective of just learning more as an educator, and then a couple you can share with parents who are interested in figuring out more, learn more about CTE from the parent perspective and learn about what they can do. So just wanted to put that out there as we think about our why. Maybe you can follow up with some resources to help you even more with that. So.
And I can probably, after today, we have another statewide system of support. The CCIP has some more parent resources that I'm sure I can get one of my friends to give me that we can put on the home base as well. All right, Don, how about identity and belonging?
Thank you. So, as we talk about identity, I want you to think about this in the context of the connections that was referred to earlier with CTE students, the learning environment, and such. And it is really difficult to form authentic connections if you don't honor the audience that you have in front of them. And to best honor that audience, you got to honor the fact that that audience is different and is made up of so many different complex aspects. And so, as a part of UDL, you've got to honor student variability, those differences that come along. And identity markers are an easy way to pick up, use, and make connections with along the way. So, when we talk about identity, just to simply level set, we're talking about referring to an understanding of who we are, right? Identity encompassing all of the things of memory and experiences, relationships, the values, all these things that we build together that create our sense of self. From an outside perspective, looking inward at someone, though, we have identity markers, and we have here on the screen just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the more common or more prominent identity markers that exist, that of race and ethnicity, culture, gender, language, and disability. These markers, again, are ways that we clue in to, and it tells us a little something about a person, but it doesn't tell the entire story. But there are aspects that you can very quickly key into, acknowledge, and connect to begin to form those connections. Next slide, please. So as we think about it, as I mentioned, identity is complex. And by complex, I simply mean that it's contextual. How a person shows up doesn't mean that's the end all be all to who that person is. So, as an example here, obviously, as mentioned, I'm an African American, and I'm an African American male, but that's not the sum total of all of my identities. And here, contextually speaking, here are a bunch of them. I'm also, as mentioned earlier, a husband and a father, and those other two rascals you see to the left and to the right are two more of my, well, you see Autumn on the left and you see Anthony who's on the right. Anthony is our oldest child. And I'm also not only a parent of a son and a father of a son, but Anthony also is on the spectrum as well. So I'm a parent of a student or of a young man who is autistic as well. And then we have a middle child who didn't make this particular photo. She wasn't there for this celebration, but we also have a third child. So that's a part of my identity. If you look over on the right, I'm also a sci-fi lover, major sci-fi comic book geek and Trekkie, the original Trekkie, not that next generation stuff, but the original Spock, Kirk, and McCoy. And then, as mentioned earlier, I'm also a doctoral student. So all of these things make up who I am. And as you know more about me and you want to form an authentic relationship with me, the better you understand my varying identities and can connect to those, the more likely you create an environment of engagement, which is what we look for to pull students in and tie them into those learning goals. Next slide, please. So again, when we talk about that learner variability, when we talk about those differences, differences that people bring together, they also differ along a spectrum as well. You can have two people come into the room with similar identity markers, similar aspects of who they are in terms of their identity. But depending on the situation, going back to this concept of identity as contextual, they will bring variability in their level of interest. Some people may be more interested in the subject matter than others. Others may bring different levels of variability as it relates to effort, emotional well-being, their ability to perceive content, language, background, all of these different aspects. And as you see, they're color-coded here, representative of the graphic organizer for UDL as well. But the point is that even when we see people that have some similar identity markers or similar characteristics, the differences still go that deep. And we just have to have a basic understanding of that as we engage with our learners. Next slide, please. So I wish I could get a show of hands here, but the concept of intersectionality also brings another layer to this understanding of people and their identity. And intersectionality, as defined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an attorney from California, who really coined the phrase, but the concept has been around obviously for a much longer period of time. It's really just a metaphor, as she says here, for the understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality and disadvantages, as perceived through identity, sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles that not often are understood among conventional ways of thinking. So, for example, well, I'll add on the next slide in just a moment. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. But the key here is that these identity markers are perceived forms of inequality and disadvantage. And that's key. They're perceived. And whether they are or not, we do not define the students by those inequalities or those disadvantages. We just acknowledge them, we design for them, possibly, potentially, so that in the event that they are real, the design lifts them up and normalizes the situation around the students relative to those inequalities. Next slide, please. So some examples of the intersectionality that I was referring to in the previous slide would be this. You've got three different persons in your classroom with different layers of who they are as examples, again, of intersectionality. Person one, Hispanic. They're disabled, female, and cisgender. All of these things are part of the contextual identity that makes up person number one. Person number two, African American, lesbian, poor, and homeless. Person number three, Polish, English language speaking, excuse me, single parent and in foster care. So, as we think about our students and honor this level of variability, this level of difference, and we think about it in terms of design, again, not asking anybody to design for each one of these elements specifically, but design around the margins, around the outside, so that those who find themselves on the inner portions of it are lifted up as well. So, for someone who's homeless who wouldn't have an access to technology, if you build a learning environment where the technology is there and the ability to complete the assignment can be done in the classroom, now you've taken care of person number two. But persons one and three, who may or may not have that challenge, they're also supported as well, again, whether they need it or not. Next slide, please.
I just want to jump in
Oh,
because
sure.
when we were first talking about this, Dawn, and we were talking about this slide, we were also pointing out that when we design for all of this intersectionality in our classrooms and our pathways and our programs, it would make kids feel welcomed,
Yep.
right? And it would make them feel like maybe they have a place in a space where they
Yep.
belong, wanting to be part of this, right?
Yep.
And even if it maybe wasn't their passion, right? Like their particular field that they thought they were going to be in, just designing a space where they feel welcome may want them to, they may want to continue to be part of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. If we continue, we can leave it right here on this slide. When we think about the example given about the technology piece, where in other classes where it may not necessarily have been designed for, and it brings up for this individual who was homeless or maybe just didn't have the economics available for the technology to get the work done, it calls them out unnecessarily. But if you've designed for this and it's already there, they walk into what they perceive to be a situation of normalcy, which creates that opportunity for feeling like I'm welcomed, like I belong. And then all that ties right into this slide right here. So it's a perfect segue. Thank you for lifting that up. That when you have an identity that you have, when you have having an identity, excuse me, can give you a sense of belonging, which is important to your well-being and confidence. And so connecting to that in your design builds in the well-being and the confidence opportunity for your learner. Equity is so important, Kelly lifts up in the chat. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Next slide, please. I want to leave this here for just a moment. Have you take a second just to read this and internalize this incredible quote here. And then we'll talk about it in just a few seconds. The key part of this, to me, is having a sense of belonging leads to flourishing in every environment and group, big or small, from your home to your culture at large. When you create that welcoming, as Jennifer mentioned, when you create that opportunity for students to feel like they belong in the classroom, imposter syndrome gets to go away at that point. And I'm sure if you're not familiar with the term of imposter syndrome, it's that feeling of you don't belong. It's that feeling of you don't belong in the room, that people are so much better than you, or that you don't have the tools, you don't have the skills. You start minimizing yourself. You start doing all of these crazy things that have absolutely nothing to do with your actual ability to thrive in that particular environment. But when that environment is created with that sense of belonging built in through design, then you create this opportunity for people to flourish, for them to show up as who they are. And in most cases, when kids, learners are able to show up as who they are and bring their whole authentic self to the learning, amazing things happen in the classroom. And I know you all have seen that. Next slide, please. So when you know who you are, you can quickly determine whether or not you belong without a doubt. Next slide, please. So all of this ties into, and I'll just sit here briefly with this, all of this aspect of understanding identity and contextual aspects of it and intersectionality all lends itself to the importance of inclusive learning, represented by these two key concepts of diverse representation, reflecting again all aspects of the learner's identity in all different forms of methodology in your classroom. And then it also begins to address the power dynamic in the room as well between the teachers and the learners, primarily creating an opportunity where we go from teacher and learner to teacher and learner in terms of voices being heard and valued. And that's what we want to key in on. And again, that being heard, being valued, all of this folds into that sense of belonging. Next slide, please. So how does this all tie in with UDL? For those who my understanding is a lot of people on in our session tonight have an understanding and a connection to UDL. But again, If you know who you are, if it's being acknowledged, if it's being lifted up, it lends itself to the principle of engagement. And you in your design want to look for multiple ways to tie into this principle, utilizing again the guidelines across the board. So again, bringing an opportunity for people to bring their authentic selves to the learning environment and honoring the different multiple intersecting ways that identity come together in this notion of learner variability. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There we go. Oops, we missed representation. Can we go back a slide? Oh, let's go back one more. There we go. Ah, there we are. It's not a real session if technology doesn't go wonky at some point along the way.
Had it on representation, and I wonder if you didn't see it, and then I couldn't go back. So I don't
Oh,
know what
okay.
happens.
Okay.
Sorry, Dawn.
No worries whatsoever. So when we talk
Hey,
about
and
design,
can I ask you a favor, Dawn? Can you make
sure.
sure that you read everything on the slide? Because I don't know if all of our participants are actually seeing the slides. They might
Okay,
just be listening in.
okay, very good. All right. Well, then when we talk about designing multiple means of representation, what we're talking about is the learning and the transferring of learning. It happens when multiple representations and perspectives are used because they support learners' ability to make connections within as well as between concepts. And we also acknowledge that learners differ in the ways that they perceive and make meaning of information. So again, that's why we want to have multiple means of representation there. But equally as important, we want to consider how people, cultures, individuals, and collective identities, back to that concept again, as well as perspectives, are all represented within the context. So that's what we're talking about here when we again acknowledge identity, creating that sense of belonging, funneling it through this principle of representation. Next slide.
Well, even like
Oh,
thinking
sure.
about sensory disabilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, just what I was saying, they may be listening in, but it may actually be because there's a disability, right? There could be a visual thing going on, but there could be learning disabilities, which is why we would want representation, right? Dyslexia being one, diverse needs, non-dominant cultures, language, all of those pieces, right? And if we approach
Absolutely.
it this way with also thinking about identity and belonging.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we want to make sure that we're considering all of those, and we bring that same thinking into designing multiple means of action and expression by which we're talking about how you convey the information to the students and how the students can convey their understanding of the information back to you as the teacher or facilitator of the information. So we're just being reminded that learners differ in the ways they navigate a learning environment, their approach to the learning process, and how they express what it is they know. So, for example, all of the individuals, including those with disabilities, approach learning tasks very differently. And depending on the context, some may prefer to express themselves in perhaps a written text, maybe not speech, or vice versa. And it also should be recognized that when we talk about action and expression, that requires a great deal of strategy and practice and organization, which is and this is another area again in which learners will differ. So again, we have to think about the tools that we use for students to express themselves. This gets back to having accessible technology in the room so that they can manipulate whatever they need to in order to better express their knowledge and understanding about it, as well as getting to the different kinds of platforms that you can use. So can they do it in the form of a video? Can they do it in the form of a podcast? I mean, depending on what it is you're asking them to do, can they draw it out and explain it to you that way? Instead of doing a group presentation or a presentation in front of the classroom, can you pull them off to the side and they can tell it to you one-on-one? The bottom line is, what's the goal? Is the goal demonstrating that the skill or your understanding of the content, or is the goal the means to get to that particular goal or skill? That's where we have to differentiate. Jennifer, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, you're right on it. You know, this is where I kind of go down rabbit holes, right? what is the demonstration of understanding? Does it always in CTE have to be the product, right? And so I typically like to use the example of construction tech or BITA or whatever your program is called. I understand the safety that is needed, but still for inclusiveness, could a student, could a learner who maybe cannot use the equipment because of safety still be able to wear the safety equipment and stand nearby to be included in the course and tell another student what needs to be done to effectively and safely use the equipment, right? Or why is it that they cannot be in the class at all, right? If they can safely be in the space, wear the goggles, all the thing, but maybe they cannot themselves manipulate the equipment, but they can learn and they can explain and they can have somebody else do it. Can they be an active participant in the class, right? I always go back to what is the demonstration of understanding? And I know sometimes certificates require that production, but does that mean that they can't be in the class, right? Just something to always think about.
No, you bring up such a great point with respect to that, that sometimes we get a little too caught up in, okay, that's that certification piece. Everything doesn't have to always be about that. Perhaps again, a person who may not be able to get the certification because they can't manipulate whatever the task or equipment may be, but they understand the concept, they understand the process. When you start thinking about the career field itself, can they bring that understanding into the career and still have an employable opportunity for themselves under that kind of setting? So it's just about expanding how we look at things across the board. And if you want to get a really great example of that, if you have a chance to see the documentary on Christopher Reeve, for me, the original Superman, who had a terrible accident that left him a quadriplegic, if I'm getting the term correctly, paralyzed from the neck down. I had no idea about this, but long after that accident, he went on to direct two movies in that physical condition, because he was there in front of the camera monitors and had someone else there handling any manipulation that he needed to in terms of the information, and he just guided people using his mind, his thoughts, his voice, guided the shot compositions and so forth, and still was a director for those two films. It was the most phenomenal thing I've ever seen in my life. It just brought me to tears, to be perfectly honest with
Can you say again, Don, the name of that movie?
you. The movie is called, it's on Max, HBO Max. It's
Okay.
called Super/Man. It's a documentary of the life of Christopher Reeve. Phenomenal documentary to check out.
I just want to make sure everybody heard that. I know you've
Certainly.
shared it with me before. So,
I think we're ready to move on. Okay, and I think this is where you come in.
well, you were going to share this, but I don't mind coming in.
Okay.
Um, so we're going to take all of that. And like I said at the beginning, I wish I had more than an hour, but we're going to show you a start anyway. So if we think about the UDL foundational concepts of the barriers in the design, not the learner, that variability is a norm, it's contextual, it can be planned for, and that the goal of UDL is expert learning, then we can tie it to the UDL design process of setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipate the variability, and then design options to minimize barriers. We can start looking at that through CTE kind of lens. And so the most important part of this UDL design process that we can start with today is that set clear, rigorous goals part. I wish we had time for everything, and I am going to give you some resources of where we can go next. And some key questions that I really want you to think about is just thinking about the goal of UDL and CTE. So many places and spaces that we're going to talk about goals, right? Because we can have goals in the moment. We can have them for a lesson. We can have them for a unit. We can have them for a course. We can have them for a pathway, right? They are just everywhere. But in general, we want to think about, are the means, the how, separated from the content? Is the goal relevant and meaningful? Do I have a plan to communicate the goal to the learners? And I wish we had really a lot of time to talk about barriers in communication with CTE in general. But also, is the goal rigorous and in service of learner agency? Because these are things that if we're doing this all the time and thinking about universally designing our goals, we can help minimize barriers. Because barriers exist in a lot of design areas. They do exist in goals, and we want to think about what will guide instruction, minimize barriers to learning, motivate students, and foster learner agency is what that should say. There can be barriers in the materials. How is the content being represented? And sometimes we are restricted to the adopted curriculum, but we can still think about what else can we do to add to. There are barriers in the methods. How is the content being delivered? What else can be done? The assessments, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but how is the learning being demonstrated? And there are barriers in the environment. How is the climate culture supportive of the learning? Well, Dawn just went through a whole bunch of things about identity and belonging, and that can help minimize the barriers in the environment. So knowing that these barriers exist, I went through a process. I told you this was a passion project of mine. And when I started looking at data in my area and wishing that there were more CTE pathway completers, I started doing empathy interviews. I did empathy interviews with CTE teachers. I did empathy interviews with counselors, with site administrators, with district level administrators. And I asked a lot of questions. And if I was to share with you just a common theme about barriers with goals, again, only have time for goals today. Common theme was about lack of clarity and objectives within a course and what is considered mastery. But not only that, it was kind of like, who decides what mastery is? And there was a really big disconnect, and people really having to think about like, what defines mastery in my program? Is it certification? Is it doing the skills? Is it physically having to produce a product? Is it becoming employed? And really people having to think about it and breaking it down. And so I would challenge everyone to think about, what is the goal? And you can think about it with this analogy of a GPS and a destination. So you think about, where do you want to go, right? And you can put it in your phone. And where are you now? Here's your starting point. And how do you want to get there? So if you think about, here's where we wanted to go, and we all were trying to get to the same place. So there was a group today that all needed to get to one location, and they all had different starting places. And when they put it in their phones, it gave not only different routes, but it would give you, did you want to take public transportation? Did you want to avoid tolls? Did you want to bike? Did you want to walk? All those things. So you can think about your CTE programs the same way. If it's a lesson goal, if it's a unit goal, if it's course, or your whole pathway in general. And so I challenge you to think about that and breaking it down. What is the ultimate goal? And I don't mind using Brian and talking about Brian, my autistic son in culinary. At one point in his life, he was doing behavioral therapy, and trying to use the stove was a goal. But to this day, he does not like putting things, no, he doesn't mind putting things in the oven. He doesn't like taking them out. Well, his culinary teacher does not see taking things out of the oven as a goal. So he has a teammate, and his teammate can take the things out of the oven for him, because that is not a goal for Brian. Like, did he follow the recipe? Yes, he did, right? And so can somebody else get something in and out of the oven for him, and he still can demonstrate mastery? Yes, he can. So when we think about universally designing goals, we also want to make sure that we are thinking about flexible without the means embedded. So it does not mean every kid gets their own goal. That's not what flexible means. It means that we do not say the how when we create the goal. So it doesn't mean that they must demonstrate it with a test, right? They will figure out how we are going to demonstrate their understanding. Clear and discrete, only one goal at a time. They're challenging, relevant, grade level, content. So when we're setting clear, rigorous goals, I really took some time. I went through a lot of CTE coursework to try to come up with some specific examples of things you could ask yourself. Does the goal offer flexibility and how the understanding is demonstrated, right? Are there kind of options? Do learners have multiple paths to reach the goal? So thinking back to that GPS analogy. So when you're designing that goal and you're even thinking about your lessons and you're thinking about the learning, consider these as well. Be clear on whether it's a skill goal or a content goal. Does it need to be something where they're demonstrating a skill? Because sometimes that's really important. However, like my example earlier, maybe it's computer graphics and it's a skill. They have to demonstrate they know how to use Adobe. That being said, can they tell somebody else how to manipulate the software, right? But it is a skill goal. Or is it a content goal? I need to know the color wheel, or I need to know a recipe, or it's child development, and I need to know some particular content about the growth from 0 to 3 months, those types of things. Another design consideration would be provide examples for ways understanding may be demonstrated. Give your learners some examples of things they may be able to do, but be willing to also think about a student coming to you, a learner coming to you and saying, hey, Miss Hanks, would it be okay if I did this? And you ask them, well, are you able to show me this? And the kiddo goes, yes. Can you show me this? Yes. Can you show me this? Yes. And then you thinking in your own context whether or not you're okay with it. But if they can still demonstrate all the pieces that you were looking for with the examples you gave, then maybe it now becomes a new option. And then the other piece, the last one I have here, is identify and minimize barriers the goal might pose for learners. To the best of your ability, we cannot we cannot eliminate every barrier. But as you're thinking about that goal, really think about what maybe I've missed, look at it one more time, and then really try to minimize those barriers. Dawn, is there anything to this slide that you want to add that I might have missed?
Not so much, nothing that you missed. I just wanted to lift up. This is probably where, if we're not careful, our own bias can get in the way of what students can actually be able to do. So going back to the example about your son and not wanting to take things out of the oven, again, bias would kick in and say that that's just a part of the goal, and mix that up with, did he make the item properly following the recipe? Because that is truly what needs to happen. How many times have you created something in your own kitchen, you're cooking something, and you couldn't get to the stove to get it out when it was time to get in, and you said, hey, hun, can you run over here and pull that out of the oven? How is that any different than the scenario you're talking about for your son in that learning environment? So we to help with this design, self-reflection on your own biases, and we all have them, and they're not necessarily bad in and of themselves. They're just a part of who we are. But that self-reflection piece, I think, is really critical as you're thinking about this, so that you can, as much as possible, get yourself out of the way to leave room for the student and innovation to take place for the student to be able to really demonstrate that they know how to do the skill or they understand the content. That would be the only thing I would want to add.
Oh, I'm glad you did. That's very, very relevant. Yeah, because I'll have to think back. What is actually the goal? What is it I really, really want my learners to do, right?
Yeah, real quick, and it's funny, this is all in the kitchen. As I mentioned, my son Anthony's on the spectrum, and for the longest time, we were getting him to fix his own food, teaching him to do that, but he would use the microwave all the time. And so we got to be really concerned about all the processing that comes with microwavable food. And we'd like, Anthony, you need to learn how to cook on the oven. And he just wouldn't do it. And then one day I just said, Anthony, and I went UDL on him. Anthony, what is your barrier to operating the stove? What is keeping you from doing that? And he looked at me in those uncertain terms. He said, I'm concerned with how high to turn the fire up. And in the back of my mind, I went like this, like, oh my God, really was it? And I said, I got you, son. Let's go in here. Let's talk about this. And now that I got that bias out of my way because of course you know how to turn on the stove. You see us do it all the time. Again, I moved myself out of the way, showed him how to do that, and now he cooks like it's nobody's business. The same thing all the time, but he's still cooking. So all is good. We keep moving in the right direction.
Love that. So for our intentional close and possible next steps for all of us, I use this image of a treasure map because, again, I told you this was a passion project. And so I'm still looking for that X marks the spot. We had an activity today where we were thinking about what might be a future headline. And I can't remember exactly what mine was, but it had something to do with success for all, CTE completion rates at an all-time high or something. So that would, maybe be the X marks the spot. But I have been on this journey for a while. And again, I think that all of us sharing resources and ideas on how to minimize barriers is great. And so as you reflect on the ideas that have been shared today, which again was all we could do in our short hour, I ask you to think about what has affirmed your thinking and or pushed your thinking and or what might your learners need to do next. And since we are all on this journey for the X marks the spot, and I believe that the more we share our ideas, the more we can make CTE programs accessible for all students, I would really love if you would share any of this or all of this in the chat, because my idea is that we'll take the chat and we will collectively put it into the home base, which you all have resources to. And then everyone who participated today or who is watching the recording later will have ideas of next steps or our thinking or things to do next. So I'll give everybody a quiet moment who might want to put things in the chat. We have a few things coming in from the chat. Having a clear goal that all learners can connect to is critical. I appreciate the context around identity in this conversation, especially as it pertains to our secondary students. Affirm, think outside the box in order to provide access for our kids. It pushed. The certification is not the only goal. Next steps would be aware of opportunities to advocate for our kids as it pertains to CTE. This is great. We will obviously put these into the letting you know some upcoming partnerships that we have across the CCIL project for webinars. There is a lesson design workshop coming up on February 24th. There is the UDL school implementation criteria coming up on March 31st. Leading through and UDL Lens on May 5th. Also, we have our CCIL statewide resources on our website, ccil.cacst.org, so ccil.cas.org. We have our previous webinars recorded with the slide decks. We have our top tips available, as well as our Got a Minute learning series. And for those of you that are live right now, it looks like registration links are being dropped in the chat. And for those of you who would like to continue your journey with CTE, there is an upcoming free opportunity that PCOE and CCIL is putting on. Okay, it's me. I'm putting it on, really, but it's an interactive virtual opportunity for CTE educators to explore more about how to address common barriers in CTE and provide practical strategies to address those barriers. So it will be an interactive series. It's March 3rd and March 10th from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You do need to register. The link is on the slide deck, and it's completely free. I would love for you to join. If you found this interesting, you will continue your learning for sure. And then feedback. Feedback is a gift. We truly value it here at CCIL and at CAST. And I think this link is also being dropped in the chat as well. And for me, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I know we're going to stay on for Q&A if anybody else is planning to stay.
I just want to thank you all as well. And Jennifer, thank you for allowing me to partner with you today. It has been an honor and a pleasure, to say the least.
It's been fun collaborating with you the past couple of months.
So just a reminder, thank you everyone who has joined today. We will have office hours following this. So if you want to hang around for office hours, just stay on and we'll take any questions that you may have regarding UDL in general, any questions you have about today's presentation. Yeah.
Brenda, do you think I'm good to stop sharing?
Yeah, stop sharing and stop recording. Thank you. Stop recording and then we can hang around.